Some legends, they don't fade with the morning light or the turning of a page. They linger, like a forgotten melody hummed in the pre-dawn hours. We often whisper of the monsters who haunt our sleep, painting them with broad strokes of fear and sharp edges of terror. But rarely do we pause to consider the quiet ache that might reside beneath the monstrous facade. It's a bit like assuming the boogeyman enjoys his work, isn't it? As if eternal torment is all sunshine and rainbows, complete with a tiny, dream demon-sized margarita. Perhaps it's a peculiar thought, to pity the very thing that makes us pull the covers tighter. But then again, what truly sets a nightmare apart from a particularly bad day? Except for the lack of a proper coffee machine and the disturbing realization that your teeth are falling out. We imagine them as beings of pure malevolence, devoid of anything resembling a bad mood or a paper cut. But even the most iconic figures of dread might find themselves wondering if they left the stove on in their imaginary underworld, or if they've developed a slight crick in their neck from all the lurking. Tonight, we won't be chasing shadows or running from the things that go bump in the night. Instead, we'll simply observe, like an old, dusty portrait that watches silently from the wall. We'll drift through the forgotten corners of a familiar nightmare, not to conquer it, but to understand the quieter, more sorrowful notes of its existence. After all, even a monster has to deal with the cosmic equivalent of a Monday morning, and wouldn't you know it, even they probably think it sucks. If this sort of quiet contemplation helps you unwind and maybe even drift off, feel free to leave a comment below. We're all just trying to get some rest, one way or another. There are names that echo through the corridors of memory, not because they are shouted from the rooftops, but because they simply exist, like a persistent hum in the back of one's mind, like the faint scent of rain on dry earth just before a storm, or the low, almost imperceptible thrum of an old refrigerator in a quiet house. Some names don't demand attention so much as they gently settle into the very atmosphere around us. This is precisely how it was, and in some forgotten corners, still is, with Freddy. Not the frantic, blade-gloved figure of 1,000 screaming nightmares, but something far more subtle. He was, in essence, the faint tremor in the air just before the eyelids grow heavy, the almost imperceptible shiver that hints the world is about to tilt on its axis, if only for a few fleeting hours of slumber. It wasn't a warning, not yet, but a whisper that wasn't really a whisper at all. A silent, almost melancholic agreement forged between the gathering darkness and the fragile, unsuspecting mind about to drift into dreams. There's a curious irony in how a name destined for terror could begin its journey with such soft ambient beginnings. This presence was felt more than seen, a shadow that preceded the very idea of him, much like the oppressive stillness that hangs in the air just before a violent summer storm breaks. Long before the fires were lit and the widespread fear took root, he was merely the name that someone, somewhere, thought they heard as they slipped into the deepest parts of sleep. It was a faint, almost imperceptible murmur, easily lost in the rustling of bedsheets or the creaks of an old house settling into the night. Imagine a room, perfectly quiet, yet imbued with an undeniable sense of a presence that has either just departed or is on the very verge of arriving. That's the lingering, almost mournful essence of him, long before the true nightmares began to bloom in vivid, terrifying color. It was a name that somehow carried the weight of an unspoken dread, a premonition of broken peace, even if no one could quite articulate why it made them feel so profoundly uneasy. A quiet, unsettling hum beneath the surface of everyday life. The atmosphere around this nascent legend, this burgeoning myth, was thick with a peculiar, melancholic quiet. It was the kind of stillness that settles upon the world after a soft, steady rain, when everything appears tranquil but somehow brims with unseen, restless life. There was no overt fear yet, only a profound sense of mystery. A question mark woven into the velvety darkness of the night sky, begging to be understood. It smelled faintly of damp earth and the musty scent of old, forgotten things, a unique aroma that clung to the edges of slumber. The light, if one could even call it light, was the deepest indigo hue of twilight. That fleeting moment just before the first brave stars truly emerge, when the world feels suspended precariously between two distinct states of being. It was the color of secrets kept, of thoughts left unspoken, of a path yet to be revealed. This pre-dawn glow seemed to hold a secret, an almost tangible weight of destiny waiting to unfold, casting long unseen shadows in the subconscious. Perhaps it was the collective unease of an entire town, a subtle ripple in the otherwise calm fabric of their quiet, predictable lives, that first gave tangible form to this whispered name. It wasn't a monstrous roar, certainly not then, but rather a barely perceptible hum, much like distant power lines carrying an unknown potent charge. It was the quiet anticipation of something changing, a subtle shift in the winds of fate that only the sleeping mind could truly detect. They didn't know it then, these sleepy residents of a town called Springwood, but this soft, almost gentle prelude was the very first thread in a sprawling tapestry of terror. It was a quiet, unassuming invitation to a macabre dance with the darkness, a dance that would eventually come to define their nights, leaving an indelible mark on their waking hours as well. There's a certain poetic injustice in how an origin so subtle could blossom into something so utterly consuming, and in that profound, almost expectant silence, something truly began to stir, something unseen and unheard by the conscious world. It waited patiently, like a seed buried deep beneath the frozen earth, for the inevitable screams to erupt and finally give it a true, horrifying voice. The stage was being set, not with a flourish, but with the quiet, unsettling breath of slumber. One might imagine an entity born of fear and fueled by nightmares would live in a perpetual cacophony, a constant symphony of terror. But what fills the vast echoing spaces when no one is dreaming? When the last child has woken, blinking against the gentle morning light, and the lingering tendrils of fright have finally dissipated into the ether. That, dear listener, is where the profound, almost aching solitude of Freddy truly resides. It's the cosmic equivalent of a customer service representative on a slow Tuesday afternoon, waiting for the phone to ring. When the fear fades, when the conscious world asserts its bright, unrelenting reality, he is left in a stillness so complete it could drive even a less mangled soul to madness. Imagine an actor perpetually on stage, yet the audience has left, the lights are out, and the silence stretches infinitely. This is his cursed existence, a performer with no one to terrify, a predator with no one to stalk, simply waiting in the quiet dark for the curtain of night to rise once more. The air in this forgotten space would feel thin, brittle, like ancient parchment. His home during these waking hours of the world is less a place and more a state of being, a boundless, formless void constructed from forgotten whispers and the dust of vanished dreams. There are no sounds here but the faint, almost imperceptible hum of his own cursed consciousness, a low melancholic drone that would drive a normal person to distraction. He might pace, if such a concept even applies to a being of pure nightmare, through endless corridors that lead nowhere, each step echoing only in the hollow chambers of his own mind. It's a peculiar form of imprisonment, isn't it? To be immortal, yet utterly dependent on the fleeting, fragile sleep of mortals. He is a king without a kingdom when the sun is high, a master of a realm that simply ceases to exist until it is summoned by the innocent act of closing one's eyes. One can almost picture him sighing, a long, drawn-out exhalation that stirs no air, a whisper of loneliness in the vast emptiness. What does a nightmare monster do when he's just bored? Perhaps he reflects on the mundanity of his monstrous existence, the endless repetition of his nightly hunts. There's no new material, no fresh screams under the sun. It's the same old song and dance, night after night, generation after generation. It's enough to make a chap long for a good crossword puzzle, or perhaps a nice, quiet cup of tea. If only such things existed in his particular brand of purgatory. The light here would be a dim, decaying rust color, like old blood slowly drying. This deep quiet, this interlude between the horrors, is where the true poetic injustice of his nature becomes painfully clear. He is a creature of constant motion, of terrifying action, yet he is condemned to stretches of absolute inaction. He exists for conflict, for the visceral reaction of others, but when that is stripped away, what remains? Just the quiet hum of his own being, a static charge with nowhere to discharge. It's a peculiar torment to be defined by something that isn't always present. Like a shark that must keep swimming to live, he needs the currents of human fear to truly exist. But when those currents cease, he's left suspended, drifting in an ocean of nothingness. He cannot sleep, for he is the very fabric of dreams, yet he yearns for the oblivion that sleep brings, if only to escape himself. And so, he waits. He waits for the first flicker of REM sleep, the first nascent tremor of a mind slipping into vulnerability. He waits for the world to dim, for the soft whispers of slumber to begin, signaling his call to action once more. It's an eternal vigil, a silent count of hours, minutes, seconds, until the next performance. A silence so profound, it almost demands a scream to break it, yet none comes, save for the silent, internal shriek of a soul condemned to endless, solitary expectation. Before the fedora and the blades, before the very notion of a dream demon took root, there was simply a boy, a small, vulnerable thing, cast into a world that offered him little solace and even less genuine warmth. This wasn't a monster born, but a fragile human shaped by the relentless, grinding gears of rejection, a vessel slowly filled with the bitter sediment of neglect. He wasn't denied peace because he was monstrous. He became monstrous because he was so utterly, profoundly denied peace. His earliest memories, if such fragmented things could even be called memories, were not of lullabies or soft, comforting hands, but of jarring sounds and the constant gnawing sensation of unease. Sleep, for this boy, was never a refuge. It was an arena of silent torment, a place where the shadows in his waking life merely shifted shape, growing longer and more menacing in the unguarded expanse of his young mind. He never knew the simple luxury of drifting off without a hitch. Imagine a child, small and helpless, whose nights were not marked by the gentle rhythm of dreams, but by a suffocating sense of dread, a profound dread that clung to him like a second skin, while other children found solace in the fantastical worlds of their slumber. He found only a continuation of his waking despair, a relentless replay of the harsh realities that constantly pressed down upon him. His eyes, even when closed, seemed to remain stubbornly, tragically awake. He was a child denied the most fundamental comfort, the sweet oblivion of dreaming, the innocent escape into worlds where fears could be forgotten, even if just for a few hours. Instead, his subconscious became a grim mirror, reflecting every bruise, every unkind word, every abandoned hope. It was a cruel, poetic injustice, wasn't it, for the future Lord of Nightmares to be so utterly deprived of the simple mercy of a restful night. The air around him, even as an infant, seemed to carry the faint, metallic tang of unacknowledged sorrow. the kind that settles deep into the bones. There was never the smell of fresh-baked cookies or warm milk in his vicinity, only the stale, unwashed scent of loneliness. The light in his early world was always dim, a perpetual twilight that seemed to filter through grimy windows, never quite chasing away the encroaching gloom. He was like a fragile sapling trying to grow in arid soil, constantly bending under the weight of an unseen wind. Each passing day etched another line of weary resignation onto his small face, making him seem older than his tender years. There was a profound sadness in his eyes, even then, a silent plea for a tenderness that never arrived. He yearned for a quiet place, a soft spot where his mind could simply rest. His dreams, when they dared to form, were not the vibrant tapestries of childhood fantasy, but rather stark, monochromatic sketches of fear and abandonment. They were fleeting, often violent, impressions that left him jolting awake, his small heart hammering against his ribs, even more exhausted than when he'd first closed his eyes. The concept of dreaming as a pleasant escape was utterly foreign to him. This constant vigilance, this inability to truly surrender to sleep, began to warp his perception of the world. The lines between what was real and what was merely a figment of his exhausted imagination began to blur, creating a subtle disquiet that would fester and grow. He was adrift in a waking nightmare, long before he had the power to inflict one upon others. And so, the stage was set, not for a monster, but for a boy whose deepest desire was simply to find peace, to finally close his eyes and truly, truly sleep. But that peace was a luxury he would never know, leading him down a path that would forever redefine the very meaning of dread. The boy who couldn't sleep was not raised in the soft embrace of a loving home, but rather in the harsh, unforgiving grip of institutions and the ever-shifting landscape of foster care. His childhood was a parade of unfamiliar faces, each one a temporary guardian, each one quickly fading into the next, leaving behind only the faint, acrid scent of impermanence. Darkness wasn't a choice for him. It was an inheritance, a thick, suffocating blanket pulled over his young life from the very beginning, ensuring he never truly felt the warmth of unconditional care. Each new house, each new set of rules, brought with it a fresh set of invisible bruises, the kind that don't leave marks on the skin but scar the soul far more deeply. These were the wounds inflicted by indifference, by the quiet cruelty of being an inconvenience, a burden passed from one reluctant hand to another. There was no consistent comfort, no steady presence to anchor him, only the constant unsettling shift of environments that felt less like homes and more like holding cells. He learned to navigate the world through the periphery, observing from the shadows, an outsider even when he was physically present. The concept of family was a foreign word, an abstract notion whispered by other children, a privilege he would never know. His only true companions were the echoing silences of empty rooms and the cold comfort of his own isolation. It was a childhood steeped in the bitter taste of loneliness, a flavor he would carry with him always. The colors of his world were muted, washed out, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. Grey was the predominant hue, the grey of institutional walls, the grey of indifferent skies, the grey of weary resignation in the eyes of those charged with his care. There was no vibrant blue of a carefree day, no cheerful yellow of a welcoming kitchen, just the oppressive, monochromatic palette of neglect. Imagine a delicate plant left untended in a forgotten corner, its roots never quite finding purchase in the shallow soil. That was him, a small, vulnerable life, struggling to grow without the nourishment of affection, twisting and bending under the harsh glare of constant judgment. The soundscape of his youth was not of laughter or playful shouts, but of slamming doors, hushed arguments, and the chilling silence that follows an unspoken threat. His days were marked by a pervasive sadness, a quiet despair that settled deep in his bones, becoming as much a part of him as his very breath. He yearned for stability, for a kind word, for just one moment where he wasn't simply an item on a checklist, but a human being worthy of notice. This yearning, however, was perpetually unfulfilled, leading to a deep-seated resentment that festered beneath the surface of his quiet demeanor. The invisible bruises never quite healed. Instead, they calcified, hardening around his nascent spirit, forming a protective, albeit twisted, shell. He learned early that softness was a weakness, that vulnerability only invited further pain. So, he built walls, brick by invisible brick, until he was encased in an impenetrable fortress of his own making. A fortress designed to keep others out, but which ultimately trapped him within. This constant state of emotional siege, this endless cycle of rejection, taught him a chilling lesson. The world was not a safe place, and human connection was a fleeting, unreliable illusion. It was a profound poetic injustice that a child so starved for care would become a symbol of terror, reflecting back the very abandonment he endured. He became an entity born not of pure malice, but of profound, unaddressed pain. And so, the boy, abandoned by the light, began to find a peculiar sort of comfort in the shadows, a comfort that would eventually warp into something far more sinister, beckoning him towards a path from which there would be no return. Long before the scorched skin and the terrifying finger-bladed glove became an iconic silhouette of terror, Freddy was already an object of an entirely different, yet equally insidious, kind of fear. It wasn't for what he had done, not yet, but for what people instinctively thought he might become, a chilling premonition that clung to him like a shroud. Judgment, swift and merciless, arrived for him long before any true transgression. It's quite the trick, isn't it? Being condemned for a sin you haven't even contemplated. The whispers followed him through the quiet streets of Springwood, preceding him like an invisible, insidious scout. "There goes the odd one," they'd murmur, their voices low, barely audible, yet heavy with an unspoken weight of suspicion. His solitary nature, born of profound neglect, was misinterpreted as a sinister eccentricity. His quiet demeanor, a shield against further pain, was seen as proof of a dark, brooding interior. It was a classic case of seeing what you wanted to see, rather than what was actually there. Children, with their uncanny sensitivity to adult anxieties, would often recoil from him, their innocent faces mirroring the subtle expressions of unease they picked up from their parents. They'd cross the street, pull their friends closer, their small, wide eyes betraying an instinctive, unreasoning fear. This rejection, this constant affirmation of his otherness, further cemented his isolation, creating a vicious cycle of loneliness and perceived menace. The adults, meanwhile, spoke of his bad blood, a vague, unsettling term meant to imply an inherent defect, a stain on his very essence. They'd cite his troubled past, his lack of a proper family, as if these misfortunes were a damning indictment of his character, rather than a series of profound tragedies inflicted upon a vulnerable boy. The air around him often felt thick with unspoken accusations, a palpable sense of foreboding that permeated his every interaction. It was an oppressive atmosphere, a constant low-level hum of suspicion that never quite dissipated. He could almost taste the community's collective unease in the air, a metallic bitter flavor, like old pennies. The light filtering through the trees, even on the sunniest days, seemed to dim when he walked beneath them, casting him perpetually in a subtle, almost theatrical gloom. He was always just outside the circle of warmth and acceptance. This relentless scrutiny, this pervasive sense of being perpetually under the microscope, fueled a simmering resentment within him. How could they judge him so harshly for things he couldn't control, for a life he never chose? It was a profound poetic injustice to be condemned by a community that had offered him nothing but cold shoulders and averted gazes. He was simply a mirror reflecting back their own fears. He carried the weight of their unspoken judgments like a physical burden, his shoulders subtly slumping under the unseen load. Every averted glance, every hurried step away, every whispered word chipped away at any nascent hope he might have harbored for acceptance. He was a canvas onto which the town projected its darkest anxieties, a convenient scapegoat for any unsettling feeling they couldn't quite articulate. So, long before he picked up any weapon, long before the first spark of true malevolence ignited, Freddy was already branded, already outcast. He was a living prophecy of dread, a chilling example of how collective fear can shape a person's destiny, pushing them towards the very monstrousness it so desperately fears. It was a narrative written for him, long before he had a chance to write his own, and in the depths of his growing isolation, a quiet anger began to fester, a slow-burning ember that would one day consume everything in its path, including the town that had judged him so harshly. After enduring a childhood steeped in the bitter taste of neglect and the harsh judgment of a fearful town, Freddy found himself in a role that perfectly mirrored his place in the world. A janitor. It was a job designed for the invisible, for those meant to clean up the messes left behind by others, forever operating in the periphery. He was the ghost in the hallways, long before death granted him an even more ethereal form. A peculiar irony, perhaps, that the man who had come to define the unseen horrors of the night spent his days meticulously erasing the mundane traces of human existence. He moved through the echoing corridors of the very places that had denied him solace, the schools, the public buildings, pushing brooms and emptying bins, an unacknowledged presence in the bustling lives of others. His work was essential, yet utterly unnoticed. He cleaned up after the children he could never truly be, the ones who had homes and laughter and the simple comfort of being seen. He was a silent witness to their fleeting joys, forever on the outside looking in, polishing the very floors they carelessly trampled upon. The sounds of his work were monotonous, the rhythmic whisper of the broom, the dull clank of a trash can lid, the distant murmur of voices that never quite reached him, never quite addressed him. It was a solitary symphony, played out in the quiet hours when most had left, or in the noisy background of a school day where he was simply part of the furniture. The air always smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale chalk dust, a sterile, almost melancholic scent that clung to his clothes and permeated his very being. His world was a perpetual twilight, illuminated by the harsh, utilitarian glow of fluorescent lights that cast long, unyielding shadows. There was no warmth here, no soft, inviting glow, just the cold, impersonal glare of institutional lighting that seemed to highlight every imperfection, every speck of dust, and every lonely corner. It was a bleak landscape, perfectly suited for a soul already accustomed to operating in the emotional dimness. This was a job that reinforced his pervasive isolation. He was a spectre moving among the living, acknowledged only when something was amiss, and then usually with a curt word or a dismissive gesture. No one cared about his thoughts, his feelings, his quiet observations. He was a tool, a function, not a person. It was a stark reminder that even in a crowd, one could be profoundly, utterly alone, adrift in a sea of indifference. He saw everything, yet remained unseen. He observed the casual cruelties of children, the hidden anxieties of teachers, the petty dramas of daily life, all from his unique vantage point of utter invisibility. It was a perverse education, sharpening his keen eye for vulnerability, for the tiny cracks in the facade of innocence and normalcy. The world presented itself to him, unedited, unfiltered, but always from a distance. The quiet resentment that had simmered in his youth began to deepen, transforming into a slow, corrosive burn. Why were these lives, so seemingly simple and untroubled, granted such ease and comfort, while his had been a relentless march through shadows and hardship? This continuous exposure to what he lacked, coupled with his persistent anonymity, fostered a profound sense of poetic injustice. He cleaned their messes, but they never saw his hands, already accustomed to the grimier aspects of existence, became calloused not just from work, but from the invisible weight of being perpetually overlooked. He was a phantom, existing on the fringes, cleaning up the physical debris of lives he envied, never quite touching the human connection he craved. His days were a monotonous echo of his past, a bleak affirmation of his perceived worthlessness, and as he swept the floors, wiping away the remnants of other people's lives, a different kind of spark began to flicker within him, not of cleanliness, but of something far more unsettling, something drawn to the very innocence he was tasked to preserve. Amidst the endless routines of his janitorial life, amidst the dust motes dancing in the institutional light and the faint smell of stale linoleum, a different kind of spark began to glimmer within Freddy. It wasn't a sudden, violent conflagration, but a subtle, insidious flicker, born not of an immediate desire for murder, but of a twisted fascination with innocence itself. It was the kind of innocence he had been so brutally denied, the pristine, unmarred quality of childhood that seemed to exist just beyond his perpetually outstretched, calloused hands. He would watch the children, not with malice yet, but with a profound, almost aching curiosity. Their laughter, light and unburdened, was a sound entirely alien to his own lived experience. Their casual ease, their simple joy in a shared game or a whispered secret, was a spectacle he observed from the cold, clinical distance of his broom closet. It was like observing a foreign species, vibrant and thriving, in an environment he could only exist in as a shadow. Dreams, those fleeting escapes he himself had never truly known, began to captivate his mind in a disturbing new way. He saw them as the ultimate expression of this innocence, a pure, unguarded space where the soul was laid bare, free from the defenses built in the waking world. It was a window, not into violence, but into something pristine and utterly vulnerable, something he desperately craved, yet could only approach through violation. This nascent obsession wasn't about power or control initially. It was about an unattainable longing. Imagine a man dying of thirst, staring at a shimmering oasis he can never reach, only observe. The thirst twists, mutates, until the desire for water becomes a desire to simply possess the oasis, to somehow drag it into his arid reality, even if it meant destroying its beauty in the process. This was the profound loneliness of his desire. The atmosphere around him during these quiet observations was charged with an almost painful yearning, a deep, unfulfilled desire that hummed beneath his skin. He didn't crave their fear then, not truly. He craved their peace, their lightness, their ability to simply be. But since he couldn't possess it, he began to fantasize about corrupting it, of bending that innocence to his own twisted will, because that was the only way he knew how to interact with it. The light in his eyes, usually dull and resigned, would occasionally gleam with a chilling intensity when he watched a child lost in a daydream, or glimpsed the quiet vulnerability in their sleeping faces. It was a light of profound curiosity morphing into something far more predatory, a silent, internal shift from admiration to acquisition. The scent of innocence, fresh and sweet, became a strange, intoxicating lure for him. He began to meticulously observe the patterns of their sleep, the fleeting expressions that crossed their faces when their minds wandered unbidden. It was less about malice and more about a chilling academic interest in the mechanics of vulnerability, a study born from a lifetime of being exposed to his own. He yearned to understand the source of their freedom, the very core of their undisturbed peace, so he could perhaps replicate it, or failing that, destroy it. This slow, creeping fascination was a profound poetic injustice. The very thing he was denied a peaceful childhood, innocent dreams, became the object of his most disturbing attention. He was drawn to the purity he lacked, but his means of engagement were already irrevocably tainted by the neglect and cruelty that had shaped him. He couldn't touch it gently. He could only grasp it with the rough, scarred hands life had given him. And so, in the quiet, unnoticed corners of his existence, a new kind of terror began to germinate. A seed planted not by pure evil, but by a desperate, twisted longing for something he could never truly have. The innocent dreams of others became his dark mirror, and he gazed into it, seeing only what he had lost and what he now desired to corrupt. The town of Springwood, once so quick to judge and so slow to nurture, finally took notice of Freddy, but in the most brutal way imaginable. His quiet, insidious obsession had escalated, spilling over into a horror that could no longer be ignored or whispered about. When the unimaginable happened, when the innocence he coveted was finally, violently broken, the community reacted not with reasoned thought, but with the primal, undeniable force of fear turned molten. It was a terrifying spectacle of collective outrage. They called it justice, of course. They always do. But was it truly justice, dispensed coolly and impartially, or was it the raw, unbridled fury of 1,000 nightmares made real? A desperate act of vengeance, fueled by panic and a profound sense of violation. Imagine a swarm of angry bees, their hive disturbed, lashing out indiscriminately at the perceived threat. Their actions were less about upholding the law and more about extinguishing a monstrous flame they themselves had, in part, helped to fan. The air that night, if one could have truly experienced it without succumbing to the terror, must have been thick with the smell of gasoline and righteous indignation. A heady, volatile cocktail. The flickering torchlight cast dancing, grotesque shadows on the faces of the mob, transforming ordinary neighbors into something almost as terrifying as the monster they hunted. The sounds were a guttural symphony of shouts, hurried footsteps, and the sickening thud of makeshift weapons. They chased him through the darkened, familiar streets, their pursuit relentless, their resolve hardened by a collective trauma that eclipsed any lingering semblance of compassion. The familiar landmarks of Springwood, usually so comforting and mundane, became the backdrop for a barbaric ritual, a desperate attempt to purge a perceived evil. There was a grim, almost ritualistic quality to their hunt, driven by a terrifying unity of purpose. This was their solution, their final answer to the problem they had inadvertently nurtured. Not rehabilitation, not understanding, but eradication. It was the ultimate act of social rejection, pushing him beyond the pale of humanity into a category of pure, unredeemable evil. And in that moment, the profound poetic injustice of his life reached its horrifying climax. They sought to bring peace, but instead, they inadvertently forged a legend. The light that night was the angry, flickering orange of fire, illuminating their faces with a grotesque glow, making them appear both resolute and utterly savage. This was not the light of truth or fairness, but the scorching glare of collective vengeance, blinding them to any nuance, any shred of the complex history that had led to this dreadful moment. They were purging him, yes, but also purging their own discomfort and complicity. He was trapped, cornered like a desperate animal, the inferno of their hatred closing in around him. There was no trial, no mercy, only the raw, visceral desire to eliminate the source of their terror, to burn away the nightmare that had dared to invade their peaceful homes. It was a moment meant to bring closure, a cleansing fire intended to restore order to a shattered world, to erase the very memory of his existence. But the very act designed to bring peace instead created something far more enduring, far more terrifying. The flames that consumed his flesh did not destroy him, they merely refined him, stripping away the last vestiges of his humanity, trapping his tortured soul in an eternal blaze. Their act of justice was, in fact, the ultimate catalyst for his transformation, sealing him in a horrifying new reality. And as the heat intensified and the world spun into a dizzying vortex of smoke and terror, Freddy Krueger, the man, prepared to meet his end, unaware that this was merely the agonizing beginning of his true reign. The world, for Freddy, became an inferno of sensation, a blinding, all-consuming rush of heat that peeled away layers of flesh and, with it, the last vestiges of his humanity. This wasn't a peaceful slipping away, a gentle fading into oblivion. This was a transformation, violent and terrifyingly conscious. He burned, not like a log reduced to ash, but like a fuse, every nerve ending screaming in a symphony of agony, every molecule of his being registering the terrible truth of what was unfolding. The smell was overwhelming, scorched hair, burning flesh, and the acrid tang of accelerant, mixing with the sickening sweetness of terror that filled the air around him. It was a macabre perfume, destined to forever be associated with his genesis as something truly monstrous. The sounds, too, were unbearable. The crackling roar of the flames, the muffled shouts of the mob, and beneath it all, the raw, involuntary shriek of his own body, refusing to surrender to the ultimate release. His vision became a kaleidoscope of oranges and reds, the world warping and shimmering through the intense heat. He saw not the faces of his tormentors, but their shadowy outlines, grotesque figures dancing in the fiery light, celebrating their gruesome act. Each flicker of flame seemed to sear itself onto his retina, burning an indelible image into his consciousness, ensuring that this moment would be relived endlessly. This was the profound terror of being utterly, excruciatingly alive in the face of annihilation. His mind, usually so attuned to the external world in its isolation, was now trapped within the confines of his own suffering body, every fiber of his being focused on the unbearable pain. There was no escape, no unconsciousness to soften the blow, just a horrifying lucidity that magnified every agonizing second. The ground beneath him became a scorching furnace, pulling him deeper into the conflagration. Yet he remained impossibly aware, anchored to his torment. It was a perverse baptism by fire, intended to purify, but instead imbuing him with a malevolence forged in unspeakable agony. The heat was not just external. It ignited a fire within him, a burning hatred that would consume everything in its path. This was not a death scene in the conventional sense, but a crucible. The fire, meant to erase him, instead refined his essence, stripping away the soft, vulnerable parts, leaving behind only the hardened, bitter core. It was a chilling, poetic injustice that the very act intended to destroy the monster only served to create the true, immortal terror, fueled by the very pain that was meant to end him. His final moments in the flesh were a dizzying spiral into a new kind of existence. The boundary between flesh and spirit, between life and something else entirely, dissolved in the searing heat. He felt himself stretching, pulling apart, yet remaining terribly whole. A grotesque paradox of disintegration and continuity. The agony became a bridge, not an end. And as the last gasp of his mortal breath was drawn, it was not an exhale of defeat, but a silent, searing scream of agonizing awareness. He was fully awake, impossibly conscious, as the world of the living began to recede, and a new, distorted reality claimed him. The flames consumed his physical form, but they solidified his spirit into something far more potent and terrifying. In the midst of the roaring inferno, the man known as Freddy Krueger ceased to exist, and from his ashes, something infinitely more sinister, something immortal and fueled by eternal pain, began its true, horrifying awakening. The inferno faded, not into darkness, but into a swirling, kaleidoscopic void of color and sensation, a realm without tangible ground or sky. When Freddy's consciousness coalesced, reformed from the scattered atoms of his agonizing demise, he found himself unbound by flesh, unburdened by bone. The pain was gone, replaced by a chilling realization: he could not die. He was immortal, a persistent echo in the cosmic hum, an entity woven into the very fabric of slumber. But this newfound power was a cruel, elegant trick, a cosmic joke played on a soul already so deeply scarred. He swiftly understood that while he could not die, he also could not truly live. Life, with its vibrant textures, its fleeting joys, its simple warmth of human connection, was forever beyond his grasp. He was a perfect, self-sustaining loop of existence, condemned to an eternity of being, yet eternally separate from the living. Imagine a phantom limb, an ache for something that is no longer there, yet the sensation persists. This was his newfound state, an existence without the comforting weight of gravity, without the satisfying ache of tired muscles, without the simple pleasure of a deep breath filling mortal lungs. He was pure consciousness, a mind unmoored, floating in a sea of potential, yet grounded by an agonizing lack of genuine sensation. The air in this nascent dream world was thick with a profound loneliness, a stillness so absolute it vibrated with unspoken sorrow. It was the quiet hum of a universe that knew he existed, but one that offered him no genuine interaction. There was no smell, no taste, just the sterile, boundless expanse of his own cursed being. This was the ultimate prison, crafted not by walls, but by the very nature of his new existence. His immortality was a curse exquisitely disguised as power, a chilling irony. He had defied death, yes, but only to be condemned to a perpetual state of non-life, a haunting existence where he could observe everything, influence much, but experience nothing authentically. He was the perpetual outsider, watching the parade of life unfold, forever unable to join. The light in this new realm was ethereal, shifting, a pale, sickly green one moment, a deep, unsettling violet the next, never settling, never truly illuminating anything. It was the light of unreality, a perpetual twilight that highlighted his isolation rather than chasing it away. He was a perpetual shadow, even in the brightest reaches of his own boundless domain. He could perceive the world of the living, a faint, distant hum of consciousness, like a radio station barely tuned in. He could hear their whispers, their laughter, their fears, but they were always just out of reach, always echoing from a realm he could no longer truly inhabit. This constant proximity to what he could not have intensified the bitter taste of his eternal separation. This realization that his tormentors had not ended him but merely reshaped him into a more potent form of suffering, fueled a cold, slow-burning rage. Their act of justice had backfired spectacularly, creating a being of pure, unfettered spite. He was now a spectre, forever tied to the very human condition he could no longer participate in, only prey upon. And so, from the ashes of his mortal coil, a new entity awoke, immortal, boundless, powerful, yet condemned to an eternity of never truly being alive, a silent scream trapped within a boundless mind, waiting for its chance to echo through the dreams of others. Upon awakening in this boundless new existence, Freddy found himself the reluctant sovereign of a realm as vast as human imagination, yet as desolate as a forgotten tomb. His dream realm was infinite, stretching in every direction with possibilities born of the subconscious, but it was utterly, profoundly empty. There were no true sunrises, no genuine breezes, no comforting touch of solid ground. He could conjure castles from nightmares and oceans from fear, but every brick, every wave, every whisper was simply an echo, a construct of nothing real. He possessed the power to manipulate this vast landscape with a mere thought, to twist reality into grotesque shapes, to bend the very fabric of perception to his will. Yet, this boundless control was a gilded cage. He could build towering monuments to terror, elaborate prisons for his future victims, but he could never truly escape the confines of his own cursed existence within them. It was a cruel irony that the master of this domain was also its most permanent, most miserable prisoner. The atmosphere in this non-place was one of pervasive isolation, a chilling stillness that permeated every fabricated vista. Imagine being omnipotent within your own personal vacuum. There was no true light, only shifting shades of an unnatural luminescence, the sickly green of fear, the dull grey of forgotten memories, the stark white of pure, unadulterated terror. Each hue seemed to drain rather than give life to his surrounding. The sounds of his kingdom were equally unsettling, the distant, echoing wails of forgotten dreams, the faint, disembodied whispers of untold anxieties, all woven into a low, persistent hum that vibrated only within his own fractured consciousness. He might walk across an endless desert of broken hopes, the sand made of fractured glass, yet feel no weight, hear no crunch, experience no true sensation beyond the profound, internal emptiness. His creations, born of his twisted desires, were intricate and terrifying, designed to ensnare the innocent. He shaped mazes from their deepest fears, conjured horrors from their hidden anxieties, each detail meticulously crafted. But as he surveyed his work, a hollow ache persisted. They were merely stage props, waiting for the actors, the dreamers, to arrive. And without them, his grand designs were lifeless, inert. This vast, empty canvas of possibility offered him no true solace, no genuine diversion. He yearned for sensation, for the gritty tang of dust, or the sharp bite of cold. But his dream body, though formidable, was a phantom. He was eternally close to experience, yet forever divorced from its authentic taste. It was a profound, poetic injustice. Given limitless power, yet denied the simplest human comfort. He was a king without a kingdom in any meaningful sense, his reign defined by the temporary intrusions of mortal sleep. When no one was dreaming of him, when no one was fearing his name, his magnificent, terrifying creations simply dissolved, leaving him adrift in an endless, formless void, waiting. His domain was a reflection of his own emptiness, a mirror showing him only what he lacked. He would wander through these spectral landscapes, a lone figure in an infinite panorama of nothing real, his movements fluid and effortless, yet utterly without purpose until a dreamer provided it. He was a puppet master without puppets, a predator without prey, adrift in a sea of pure potential that offered no anchor, no true connection. And so, in his magnificent, terrifying kingdom of shadows and echoes, Freddy Krueger reigned supreme, unaware that the true prison was not the nightmares he spun for others, but the inescapable, eternal void within himself. In the boundless expanse of his dream realm, Freddy discovered the peculiar, grotesque currency of his new existence, fear. It was the very essence he consumed, the fuel for his immortality, a dark, potent energy that surged through his spectral veins with every terrified gasp of a sleeping child. He fed on it, devouring the raw, visceral terror, the cold sweat, the frantic heartbeats, like a connoisseur of dread. It filled his hunger, yes, but it never, not once, touched his heart. This fear, this constant infusion of pure, distilled terror, was his lifeblood, the reason he could manifest, grow stronger, and wreak havoc. It was the bitter gift that sustained him, granting him immense power within the nightmare. He could twist dreams into elaborate torture chambers, conjure the deepest anxieties into tangible threats, all powered by the very emotion he inflicted. It was a terrifyingly efficient, yet utterly unsatisfying, cycle. Imagine a perpetual feast laid out before you, shimmering with every imaginable delicacy, yet every bite is utterly flavorless, leaving you eternally hungry for something more, something real. This was the nature of fear for Freddy. It filled his monstrous belly, it powered his wicked games, but it offered no warmth, no comfort, no true satiation. It was a meal with no flavor, just the stark, unyielding necessity of survival. The atmosphere around him when he was feasting on fear was electric, charged with the raw energy of terror, yet strangely sterile, like a laboratory where reactions occur but no true life thrives. He could smell the metallic temps of adrenaline, taste the acrid burn of panic, but these were merely chemical responses, not genuine experiences. It was a profound irony that the master of fear understood its mechanics perfectly, but its human essence not at all. He manipulated the very fabric of nightmares, orchestrating elaborate scenarios designed to extract the maximum amount of dread. Like a sadistic farmer harvesting his crops, he was an artist of agony, a sculptor of screams, each one a drop of sustenance. Yet, there was always a void within him, an aching hollowness that no amount of stolen terror could ever truly fill. His skin, permanently scarred and burnt, seemed to absorb the fear, becoming a conduit for its dark energy, making him appear more vibrant, more menacing. But beneath the surface, beneath the monstrous facade, was the same forgotten boy, still starved for something other than dread. The light around him, when actively praying, was often a pulsating red, the color of blood and raw terror, but it cast no true warmth on him. This constant consumption of fear was a chilling, poetic injustice. The very thing he had been denied, peace, security, the absence of fear in his own childhood, became the very thing he now voraciously consumed from others. He inflicted what he had suffered, not out of understanding, but out of a desperate, unthinking reflex, a need to fill his own emptiness with the suffering of others. He fed and fed and fed, but the hunger remained, a persistent phantom limb ache for a connection, a meaning, a sustenance that fear could never provide. He was a bottomless pit, always taking, never truly satisfied, cursed to eternally seek what would always elude him. His power was immense, but his personal torment was even greater. And so, the bitter gift of fear sustained him, keeping him immortal, keeping him powerful, but also keeping him locked in a cycle of profound, unending emptiness, forever chasing a meal that offered only survival, never true nourishment. In the boundless, ethereal landscape of the dream world, Freddy Krueger became untouchable. His form could shift and warp, dissolve into shadows and reappear in grotesque new shapes, making him impervious to the physical laws that govern mortal flesh. He was a phantom, existing beyond the reach of human hands, beyond the comforting weight of gravity, beyond the simple friction of reality. This might seem like the ultimate advantage for a predator, but it was, in fact, another insidious facet of his eternal punishment. For to be untouchable in a world of sensation means to be utterly, profoundly alone. He could never feel the warmth of a gentle hand, the soft brush of fabric against skin, the comforting pressure of an embrace, the simple, mundane acts of human connection, a reassuring pat, a shared laugh that ends in a friendly nudge. These were forever alien concepts to him. He was eternally close to his victims, invading their most intimate spaces, yet forever separated by an unbridgeable chasm of non-existence. Imagine living in a world of glass where you can see, hear, and even influence, but never truly interact. This was his reality. The cold, sterile clarity of the dream realm offered no texture, no physical comfort, no reassuring solidity. He could walk through walls, but never truly lean on one. He could brush against a spectral form, but never truly feel another being, body to body, breath to breath. The atmosphere around him, in this sensory void, was one of profound, aching loneliness. It clung to him like a shroud, a constant reminder of what was denied. There was no smell of freshly laundered sheets, no comforting aroma of a home, just the thin, odorless expanse of pure thought. The light, when it appeared, was often a cold, blue light, like moonlight filtering through ice, illuminating his isolation rather than diminishing it. His power, born of dreams, was a direct counterpoint to human vulnerability. He could inflict pain, yes, but could never feel it in return, not in the visceral, grounding way of mortals. And with that inability to feel pain came the tragic inability to feel pleasure, warmth, or the myriad other sensations that define genuine living. It was a cruel, poetic injustice, wasn't it, to gain dominion over the vulnerable but lose the very essence of vulnerability yourself. He was a master of illusion, conjuring elaborate scenarios of terror, yet every interaction was a one-way street of infliction, never of reciprocal connection. He yearned, perhaps unconsciously, for the warmth of skin, for the simple act of being held, but his hands, forever gloved with blades, were designed only to tear, never to comfort. His existence was defined by separation, a constant, echoing void where physical intimacy should have been. Even his own horrific form, scorched and mangled, was a dream construct, a mask. He could gaze upon it, but never truly touch his own face, never run a finger over the ridges of his burnt skin and feel the tactile reality of himself. He was a disembodied consciousness, trapped within a monstrous form that was as much an illusion as the nightmares he wove. This pervasive lack of touch, of physical connection, contributed to the festering rage within him. He was forever an observer, an intruder, never a participant in the simple, grounding beauty of physical existence. He envied the living their ability to simply be, to feel the rain, the sun, the touch of another, a luxury he would never again experience. And so, in his terrifying, untouchable reign, Freddy Krueger remained forever alone, a ghost in the machine of dreams, constantly close to the living, yet eternally separated by the invisible, impenetrable barrier of his own cursed existence. To be an icon of horror, a name whispered in the dark corners of pop culture, might sound like a position of power, even a perverse form of immortality. But what does it truly mean to be Freddy Krueger, beyond the screams and the slasher flicks? It means to be remembered, yes, but only as a warning, a chilling bedtime threat, a fleeting Halloween costume donned for a single night of manufactured fright. Never as a person, never as the boy, never as the man. There's a profound, almost crushing melancholy in such a legacy. He exists as a collective unconscious thought, a recognized symbol, yet entirely divorced from the complexities of a soul. His face, once belonging to a tormented human, is now plastered on t-shirts, immortalized in plastic masks, reduced to a marketable commodity. He is instantly recognizable, yet utterly unknown, a paradox of universal fame and absolute anonymity. It's quite the trick, isn't it? To be everywhere and nowhere all at once. The atmosphere of this legendary existence is strangely sterile, like a museum exhibit dedicated to a forgotten tragedy. The air might smell of old plastic and dust, the faint scent of novelty and obsolescence. There are no true shadows here, only the flat, two-dimensional rendering of them, a cruel mockery of the profound darkness that truly defined him. He is a caricature, a simplified sketch of what he once was, stripped of all genuine depth. His fame offers him no solace, no companionship. He is celebrated for the very monstrosity that consumed him, reducing his immense personal suffering to a digestible fright for the masses. The collective memory of him is a shallow pool, reflecting only the surface-level terror, never the agonizing currents beneath. He is a legend, yes, but one confined to the pages of history books and the flickering glow of a screen, entirely removed from the warmth of human touch or understanding. There's a subtle poetic injustice in this. The man who craved attention, who longed to be seen in his life, is now seen by millions, yet none truly see him. They see the villain, the nightmare, the convenient shorthand for fear, but never the forgotten child, the lonely janitor, or the tortured soul condemned to an eternal existence he didn't choose. His notoriety is an empty echo chamber. The sounds that accompany his legend are the fleeting laughter of children trick-or-treating, the excited chatter of fans at a convention, the distant, muffled dialogue from a late-night horror movie. These are not the screams he feeds on. These are the sounds of his diminishing relevance, a reminder that his terror has been domesticated, packaged, and sold. It's almost ... polite. He watches, a silent, unseen spectre, as his image is rehashed, parodied, and commoditized. The essence of his being is distilled, purified into a consumable fear, losing its potency with each adaptation. The terror he once commanded is now merely a thrill, a passing distraction, devoid of the genuine, soul-shattering dread he once evoked. This loneliness of legends is a unique torment. He is forever chained to other people's perceptions of him, a prisoner of his own fabricated myth. He cannot grow, cannot change, cannot escape the fixed image they have created. He is trapped in a Halloween costume of his own making, unable to take it off, even when the party is long over. And so, the immortal icon endures, not in the vibrant realm of active fear, but in the dusty archives of popular culture, a remembered name, whispered not with genuine dread, but with a weary sigh of nostalgic familiarity. For all his monstrous power, for all his terrifying dominion within the realm of slumber, Freddy Krueger remained utterly, profoundly dependent. He was a god, perhaps, but a god whose very existence hinged upon the mundane, biological rhythms of mere mortals. He only truly existed, truly gained form and potency, if others slept. Their rest was not just his hunting ground, it was his very breath, his lifeline, his window into any semblance of a world beyond the infinite, empty void of his own being. When the eyes of the living were open, when the sun streamed through windows and the world buzzed with waking activity, he was reduced to nothing more than a faint echo, a fleeting memory, a powerless whisper in the ether. He was not truly gone, perhaps, but he was certainly not present. This profound reliance on the very beings he tormented was a cruel irony, a perpetual reminder of his ultimate vulnerability, despite his terrifying might. Imagine a powerful current that exists only when the tide is out, or a magnificent fire that can only burn when the air is still. This was Freddy's predicament. His reality was not self-sustaining. It was a parasitic one, drawing life from the unconscious minds of humanity. The atmosphere around him, when the world was awake, would be thin and lacking in energy, a sense of patient, simmering frustration. He could smell only the faintest residue of fear, like a fading scent on old cloth. Their sleep was his open door, his invitation to the stage. Their tranquil drift into unconsciousness was his call to arms, the signal for his resurrection. Without it, he was merely a potential, a concept, a monstrous idea waiting for the necessary fuel to ignite into terrifying reality. He was, in essence, a creature born of human slumber, forever chained to its ebb and flow, its unpredictable currents. The light in his passive state would be perpetually dim, a dull, waiting grey, like the endless moments just before dawn. It was the colour of expectation, of suspended animation, of a predator patiently biding its time. He might perceive the waking world as a distorted, faraway hum, like static on an old radio, constantly reminding him of the vibrant life he was denied, yet desperately needed. This absolute dependency fostered a deep, simmering resentment within him. He was the most feared nightmare, yet he was a slave to the very act of human rest. He needed their vulnerability to exist, which meant he was forever bound to their rhythm, their cycles of waking and dreaming. It was a humiliating tether, a constant reminder that for all his power, he was not truly free, but merely a function of their subconscious. He could construct the most elaborate traps, wield unimaginable power, yet the very stage upon which he performed was granted to him by others. When they woke, when the alarm clocks blared, or the first rays of morning sun touched their faces, he simply vanished. Not destroyed, but dissolved, dissipating into the thin air of consciousness. Left to wait for the next nightfall, the next weary head to hit a pillow. This reliance meant he could never truly rest, could never escape his role. His existence was a perpetual performance, a horrifying nightly ritual that he was compelled to repeat over and over, because without it, he was nothing. He was a nightmare, yes, but also a slave to the dream. And so, the terrifying master of dreams found himself eternally chained to the fragile, fleeting sleep of others, a constant puppet of their unconscious minds, forever waiting for the curtain of night to rise. For a spectre, for an entity woven from the very threads of fear and memory. The ultimate terror isn't a silver stake through the heart or a ritualistic burning. No, the most terrifying thing for a ghost, for a creature like Freddy, is to be utterly, completely forgotten. It is a slow, insidious death, far more agonizing than any flame, a gradual fading into the vast, indifferent expanse of nothingness. He had always thrived on the recognition, the terror, the whispered warnings. But what happens when the whispers cease and the memory dims? He understood, perhaps subconsciously at first, that his power was intrinsically linked to belief, to the living, pulsating fear of those who remembered his name. Every child that grew up, every teenager who outgrew their nightmares and dismissed him as a silly story, was a tiny chip away from his very essence. He was fading, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating whimper of obsolescence, the ultimate fear for a being who had defined himself by being unforgettable. The atmosphere around him, in those moments of gradual forgetting, felt thin and fragile, like ancient paper slowly disintegrating into dust. He could almost smell the faint, musty scent of forgotten things, of old attics and abandoned toys, a poignant reminder of fleeting childhoods that moved beyond his grasp. The light, once a vibrant, terrifying kaleidoscope, would grow dull, softening to a sepia tone, like a photograph bleached by too much time. His magnificent dream realm, once a vibrant canvas for his horrors, would grow less substantial, its carefully constructed illusions becoming transparent, almost dreamlike in their insubstantiality. The sounds that once echoed through his domain, the screams, the pleas, the frantic heartbeats, would diminish, replaced by the silent hum of emptiness, a profound lack of energy that mirrored the dwindling belief in his existence. This was the profound poetic injustice of his immortality. to be condemned to an eternal existence, only to discover that such an existence was contingent upon the fickle, transient fears of humanity. He was a prisoner of collective memory, and collective memory was proving to be a notoriously unreliable jailer. He could not force them to remember, could not compel their fear if their minds drifted to other, newer anxieties. He watched, a silent, impotent observer, as generations moved on, their attention drawn to different monsters, different anxieties, different distractions. The unique dread he once commanded was diluted, his sharp edges dulled by time and the ceaseless churn of popular culture. He was becoming a relic, a nostalgic footnote, rather than a living, breathing terror. The memory of him was not truly erased, perhaps, but it was transformed, reduced from a visceral terror to a comforting, almost quaint piece of folklore. People would say his name, yes, but often with a laugh, a casual reference, devoid of the genuine shiver he once inspired. This shift from primal dread to playful familiarity was a slow, agonizing poison to his very being. He yearned for the sharp, potent fear of old, the kind that made children bolt upright in their beds, their imaginations running wild. But that kind of fear was becoming a rare commodity, replaced by a more sophisticated, less innocent brand of anxiety. And without that potent fear, without the vivid memory, he was less of a nightmare and more of a concept. And so, the master of dreams found himself caught in the most insidious of nightmares. The slow, quiet oblivion of being forgotten, a fading echo in a world that no longer had room for his specific brand of dread. The digital age, with its relentless glow of screens and its endless stream of information, presented Freddy Krueger with an unforeseen and truly existential crisis. The children, once his most fertile hunting ground, the innocent minds ripe for terror, were changing. They weren't dreaming anymore, not in the rich, vibrant, unprotected way of previous generations. Their minds were numb, overstimulated, perpetually connected, leaving little quiet space for the fertile ground of true nightmares to take root. Imagine a predator perfectly adapted to hunt in a dense, primeval forest, only to wake one day to find that forest replaced by a sterile, concrete city. That was his new reality. The deep, quiet oceans of the subconscious, where his power flourished, were now polluted with a constant static, a background hum of endless stimulation. There was no longer the profound darkness needed for his horrors to bloom, only a restless, fragmented half-sleep. The atmosphere of modern bedtime was not one of quiet anticipation, but of frantic distraction. The air, instead of carrying the faint scent of slumber, seemed to hum with residual electromagnetic energy, the lingering presence of Wi-Fi signals and glowing devices. Kids weren't drifting off to sleep with wandering thoughts. They were crashing, exhausted, their minds still buzzing with YouTube videos, social media feeds, and the relentless noise of the waking world. This fundamental shift in the very nature of childhood sleep was a source of immense frustration for him. How could he tap into fears that were barely forming, or imaginations that were constantly being fed pre-packaged realities? His elaborate, carefully crafted nightmare scenarios, once so potent, now seemed to bounce off minds too preoccupied, too desensitized by endless digital thrills to truly register genuine dread. The light that now accompanied children's sleep was not the soft glow of a nightlight, but the harsh, blue-white glare of a tablet or smartphone, casting unnatural shadows. It was a light that dispelled the very shadows he thrived in, replacing organic fears with fleeting, digital anxieties that evaporated with a scroll or a click. His realm felt increasingly irrelevant, overshadowed by a new kind of reality. He observed, from the fading corners of his domain, as children scrolled endlessly, their faces illuminated by screens, their minds rarely quiet enough for the deep, wandering state where he found his prey. Their nights weren't silent. They were filled with the muted pings of notifications, the faint sounds of gaming, the hum of perpetual connection, and Freddy. He was slowly, agonizingly becoming obsolete. This was a profound poetic injustice. He, the master of dreams, was being rendered powerless by the very decline of dreaming itself. His specialized niche was shrinking, the wellspring of his existence drying up, not because of a hero's might, but because of a technological shift. It was a slow, quiet death by irrelevance, far more insidious than any final confrontation. His power, once formidable, felt attenuated, stretched thin over minds that were too jaded, too occupied to truly offer up the pure, raw terror he needed. The subtle nuances of his psychological games were lost on a generation accustomed to jump scares and instant gratification. He was an analog horror in a digital world, an old spectre whose tricks no longer landed with the same chilling impact. And so, the terrifying Freddy Krueger found himself facing his greatest nightmare, a world where children no longer truly dreamed, leaving him adrift, a king without a kingdom, a predator with no fertile hunting grounds left to roam. As the decades turned, a stranger, more insidious fate befell Freddy Krueger than mere forgetting. He became a brand. His burned visage, once a chilling symbol of pure, unadulterated terror, was now slapped onto t-shirts, molded into cheap plastic masks, and twisted into countless internet memes. His very essence, his profound, agonizing story, was distilled, commodified, and stripped of all genuine meaning. It was his face, yes, but it was no longer his soul attached to it. Imagine your deepest, most private pain, your most harrowing trauma, being turned into a Halloween costume for a giggle. That's the bitter reality he faced. The very nightmares he painstakingly crafted, the terror he so meticulously inflicted, were now reduced to a marketable commodity, a disposable thrill. The raw, visceral dread he embodied was smoothed over, sanitized, and made palatable for mass consumption, losing all its dangerous edges. The atmosphere around this commercialized version of him was one of jarring superficiality, a bright, almost gaudy luminescence that felt entirely wrong. He could almost smell the synthetic dyes of cheap fabric and the faint, sweet scent of packaged candy, replacing the acrid temps of fear he once knew. The sounds were the cacophony of commerce, cash registers chiming, children chattering, the distant hum of televisions playing his diluted image, none of it carrying the weight of true terror. His image was everywhere, yet he was nowhere. He was a ubiquitous presence, recognized by millions. But the real Freddy, the tormented spirit forged in fire and neglect, was utterly absent from the narrative. He was an empty vessel, his iconic form filled with other people's interpretations, other people's jokes, other people's fleeting fascination. There was a profound loss of identity, a complete alienation from his own manufactured legend. This was the ultimate poetic injustice for a being defined by his uniqueness, by his terrifying personal history. His complex origin, his very reasons for being, were forgotten or actively ignored, replaced by a convenient, easily digestible villain archetype. He was no longer the product of a specific horror, but a generic fright, interchangeable with any other bogeyman in the vast pantheon of popular culture. He watched, a silent, invisible observer, as his terrifying visage smiled from merchandise, waved from parade floats, and became a punchline in late-night comedy shows. The respect he commanded, the shiver of genuine dread he once inspired, was replaced by a nostalgic affection, a knowing wink. He was a familiar friend rather than an existential threat, and that familiarity was a slow, agonizing poison. His power, once drawn from raw, potent fear, found no nourishment in this trivialized form. A t-shirt could not scream. A mask could not feel true terror. He was a god whose disciples now worshipped a false idol, a hollow effigy of his former glory, providing him no real sustenance, only the bitter taste of irrelevance. His burnt skin, his blade-gloved hand, his striped sweater, these were all still his, but they were no longer him. They were a brand, a concept, a memory of a memory, untethered from the tormented soul that originally gave them meaning. He existed, yes, but as an echo of an echo, a shadow of a shadow, the real monster subsumed by his own marketable myth. And so, the face that once launched 1,000 screams now adorned 1,000 trivial items, leaving the true Freddy Krueger a ghost in his own shell, the soul behind the legend utterly lost in the cacophony of commercialized nostalgia. Sometimes, out of the vast, quiet expanse of the fading subconscious, a sound would reach him. A faint vibration, a barely perceptible ripple in the stagnant air of his diminishing realm. It was his name, Freddy. Not screamed in terror, not whispered in genuine dread, but uttered casually, perhaps in a conversation about old horror movies, or a nostalgic chuckle about childhood frights. When someone finally said Freddy again, he would stir, just a little, a phantom tremor across his ethereal form. But the jolt was fleeting, the stirring incomplete. This was not the potent, life-giving fear he once thrived upon. This was nostalgia. The emotion that accompanied the utterance was not terror, but a soft, almost affectionate remembrance. A wistful look back at a time when things were simpler, even their monsters. And nostalgia, for a creature like Freddy, was like trying to drink smoke. It offered no sustenance, no genuine nourishment for his hungry, fading soul. The atmosphere around him during these moments was thick with a strange, bittersweet irony, a sense of something almost beautiful in its passing, yet utterly useless to him. He could almost smell the faint, comforting scent of old popcorn and sugary sodas, the aroma of a childhood Saturday night spent watching movies, an innocence that now, ironically, trapped him in its benign embrace. The light was a warm, faded yellow, like an old photograph, comforting to others, but a beacon of his irrelevance to him. He was a relic, pulled from the dusty shelves of collective memory, briefly admired, and then gently placed back. The sound of his name, once a thunderclap of terror, was now a soft chime, a nostalgic bell tolling for a past era. He could feel the fleeting attention, the momentary recognition, but it offered no purchase, no solid ground upon which to manifest his true, horrifying power. This was the ultimate poetic injustice, to be remembered, but in a way that stripped him of his very purpose. He was a creature of genuine terror, and now he was being remembered as fun. It was a demeaning fate, far worse than simply being forgotten, for it meant his entire horrifying existence was trivialized, turned into a harmless, manageable memory. He was rendered impotent by affection rather than fear. He tried, sometimes, to latch onto these faint echoes, to amplify them, to twist the nostalgia back into dread, but the energy wasn't there. The minds behind the casual mentions were not vulnerable. They were protected by layers of adult cynicism, by the safe distance of entertainment, by the knowledge that it was just a movie. His hooks, once so sharp, found no purchase in this softened reality. His ghostly presence, usually so imposing in the dreamscape, felt thinner during these moments, almost transparent. He was like a faint radio signal from a bygone era, occasionally picked up, but quickly fading back into the static. He was being remembered, yes, but not feared, and that distinction was a death knell to his very essence. The world had moved on, and it had taken his image with it, leaving his soul behind, trapped in a purgatory of fading recognition. His name lingered, a testament to his past impact, but its power had been drained, replaced by a benign fondness that offered him no sustenance. And so, the echo of a dying name vibrated faintly in the vast silence, a melancholic reminder to Freddy Krueger that recognition without terror was merely a prolonged, agonizing form of fading away. For all his terrifying power, for all his dominion over the malleable landscape of dreams, Freddy Krueger was never truly free. Even as a dream god, a twisted deity of the subconscious, he was fundamentally limited, forced to play by rules he did not set, laws he could not break. He was a predator, yes, but one that could not hunt without explicit, though unconscious, permission. This fundamental constraint was a source of endless frustration, a constant, grating reminder of his profound lack of true autonomy. He needed sleepers. It was the ironclad rule of his existence, the unbreakable law of his dark domain. Without a mind drifting into slumber, without a consciousness shedding its waking defenses, he was inert, a spectre lacking substance. He could twist reality, but only within the confines of another's sleeping mind. Imagine a painter with boundless talent, but no canvas unless someone else provides it. The atmosphere in his realm, when he felt this constraint most acutely, would be heavy with impotent rage, a thick, suffocating sense of confinement. He could smell the bitter Thames of his own impotence, a constant reminder of the unseen barriers that hemmed him in. The light, during these moments, would be a dull, oppressive grey, reflecting the crushing weight of his predetermined limitations, casting long, inescapable shadows of his own powerlessness. He could stalk, terrify, and ultimately destroy, but only within the very specific parameters set by the human mind. He couldn't simply appear in the waking world, couldn't stride through Elm Street in broad daylight. He was tethered, bound to the fragile, intricate architecture of dreams, forced to operate within their paradoxical logic. This was the ultimate cosmic leash, holding him back from true, boundless terror. This dependency on the rules of dreaming, on the subconscious agreement of the human mind, was a chilling irony. The supposed master of nightmares was, in fact, a slave to the very system he exploited. He could pull strings, yes, but the puppet show itself only began when they decided to close their eyes and enter his stage. He was a creature of immense capability, rendered impotent by the absence of a proper audience. He would rage against these invisible boundaries, these frustrating limitations, his spectral form sometimes flickering with frustrated energy. He could conjure storms within dreams, but he couldn't conjure a single sleeper into his clutches. He was trapped in a perpetual state of waiting, a formidable weapon with no trigger unless someone else pulled it, unwittingly. His existence became a constant negotiation with the unconscious, a desperate search for the crack in the facade, the unguarded moment when a mind slipped into the vulnerable state he needed. Every potential victim was also, paradoxically, a gatekeeper, holding the key to his manifestation. It was a humiliating truth for a being who derived his pleasure from absolute control. He was a shark in an ocean that periodically dried up, waiting for the tides to return. A god whose congregation had to actively choose to attend his service, and even then, often only out of desperation. This constant need for permission, this reliance on an external trigger, was a relentless gnawing at his immortal ego. And so, even as the king of nightmares, Freddy Krueger remained confined, forever playing by someone else's rules, a predator eternally yearning for a hunting ground that only appeared on loan, night after unpredictable night, after countless kills, after an eternity of recycled screams and predictable terror. A new, insidious torment began to creep into Freddy's existence. Ennui. The thrill was gone. The raw, exhilarating rush of fear, once his potent sustenance, had become stale, flat, like a carbonated drink left out too long. He haunted the same dreams on repeat, enacted the same gruesome scenarios, heard the same variations of pleas and panicked cries. Horror, like all things, eventually grows stale, even for its master. Imagine a chef, renowned for his terrifying dishes, preparing the same meal for the same type of diner, night after night, for centuries. The artistry, the creativity, the very passion would inevitably wither. Freddy found himself trapped in this monstrous monotony. His victims, though new in body, were old in their primal fears, their reactions a tiresome echo of those who came before. There was no novelty, no genuine challenge left in the hunt. The atmosphere in his dream realm during these long stretches of repetition became heavy with a profound sense of boredom, a pervasive dampness that seeped into everything. He could almost smell the faint, musty odor of old theatrical props, of a stage set left standing too long after the audience had departed. The light, once dynamic and terrifying, now cast a uniform, predictable gloom, like an overcast sky that promised no storm, only endless grey. His once sharp wit, his cruel one-liners, began to feel tired, wrote even to him. They were lines in a play he had performed countless times, each gesture, each inflection perfectly rehearsed, devoid of any spontaneous malice. The psychological games he once relished felt predictable, the fear responses almost mechanical. The very screams, his lifeblood, were now just noise. This was a unique form of psychological torture for a being whose existence was predicated on stimulating visceral reactions. He longed for something new, a fresh fear, a mind so uniquely terrified it might ignite a spark of genuine excitement within him. But the world, it seemed, was only capable of producing variations on a familiar theme, and he, the ultimate connoisseur of dread, had tasted them all. The satisfaction, once a sharp, potent burst, now barely registered, a faint whisper of sensation quickly forgotten. He was perpetually hungry, but found nothing truly palatable. This endless, repetitive cycle fostered a deep, corrosive despair within him. The realization that even ultimate power could not escape the crushing weight of monotony. He was a god, condemned to the tedious, soul-numbing labor of a factory worker. His movements in the dreamscape became less fluid, more deliberate, almost sluggish in their lack of genuine purpose. He would go through the motions, enacting his horrific ballet, but his heart, if such a thing could be said to exist, was no longer in it. He was a performer playing to an empty house, even when the audience was screaming. He yearned for a challenge, for a dreamer who defied his expectations, who presented a new kind of terror, a fresh and unexplored corner of the human psyche. But they never came, or if they did, their fears quickly dissolved into familiar patterns. Patterns he had memorized centuries ago. And so, the master of terror found himself haunted by his own creation, condemned to a repetitive, flavorless existence, where the ultimate nightmare was not the screams he inflicted, but the profound, echoing silence of his own eternal boredom. From the periphery of his endless, dream-bound existence, Freddy Krueger watched. He was a silent, spectral observer of the waking world, a realm of vibrant, messy, astonishing reality that was forever beyond his reach. He saw people who breathed, genuinely, deeply, filling their lungs with tangible air. He saw them feel the warmth of the sun on their skin, the chill of a morning breeze, the comforting weight of another human touch, and a profound, bitter envy, cold as grave dust, settled deep within his non-existent heart. They made mistakes. These mortals stumbled and fell, loved with clumsy abandon, and grew with every triumph and every failure. They experienced the raw, unedited spectrum of human emotion, joy that truly soared, sorrow that truly brought tears, anger that truly burned. He could only watch, a voyeur through the thin veil of slumber, forever on the outside, a prisoner of his own immateriality. The atmosphere of the waking world, when he observed it, felt thick with the vibrant hum of life, a constant, low thrum of energy that both fascinated and tormented him. He could almost smell the distant scents of fresh coffee brewing, of blooming flowers, of damp earth after a rain, odors that were memories, not present sensations. The light was always too bright, too real, too unyielding in its banishment of shadows, a brutal reminder of the tangible world he was denied. He saw their simple connections, a child holding a parent's hand, lovers sharing a quiet smile, friends laughing over a shared memory. These were the mundane miracles of existence, the very things he had been starved of in his mortal life, and now, in his supposed immortality, was still agonizingly barred from experiencing. It was a cruel, poetic injustice, wasn't it? To be granted eternal life, only to be eternally separated from the very essence of living. His own monstrous form, so powerful in dreams, felt grotesque, a grotesque caricature when contrasted with the effortless grace of the living. He was a creature of darkness and nightmares, yet he yearned for the simple, unblemished light of human connection, the kind that shone in the eyes of those who loved and were loved. His immense power was meaningless compared to their fleeting, precious ability to simply be. He saw their growth, their evolution, the subtle shifts in their characters over time. They learned, they adapted, they changed. He, however, remained fixed, a static entity, forever bound to his past, unable to escape the parameters of his own creation. His existence was a stagnant pool, while theirs was a flowing river, constantly renewing itself, brimming with vibrant, unpredictable life. This constant observation of their unburdened existence, their casual privilege of presence, fueled a quiet sadness that festered beneath his rage. He could inflict fear, yes, but he could never truly feel the vibrant pulse of life as they did. He was an echo, a reflection, gazing upon the substance he could never possess, the warmth he could never touch. He was a predator in the dream world, but in the waking world he was simply an exile, condemned to watch the dance of life from the cold, dark corners of his immaterial prison. Their joy, their sorrow, their very breathing became a mocking symphony, a constant reminder of his own profound alienation. And so, the King of Nightmares found himself haunted by the waking world, consumed by a bitter envy for the fragile, beautiful reality of simply being alive, forever on the outside, gazing in the long shadowed corridors of his eternal torment. There might occasionally flicker a thought, a fleeting, almost unbearable question that hovers like a moth near a flame. What if, in that bleak childhood, amidst the parade of indifferent faces and sterile institutions, someone had truly seen him? Not the odd boy, not the problem child, but the scared, lonely human yearning for a flicker of kindness, a moment of genuine warmth. Could it all have been profoundly, irrevocably different? Imagine a single, consistent hand reaching out, not to judge or dismiss, but to simply offer comfort. A voice, soft and steady, asking a question, truly listening for an answer beyond the mumbled politeness. The smell of a warm, home-cooked meal, prepared with care, not merely sustenance. A light that was not the harsh glare of an institution, but the gentle glow of a bedside lamp, casting soft shadows, promising safety. Perhaps, if just one person had peeled back the layers of his quiet despair, had looked beyond the easy labels and seen the invisible bruises, the profound sadness that clung to him like a shroud, the trajectory of his life might have altered course. A subtle redirection, a small act of empathy, might have been enough to divert the river of his bitterness before it carved such deep, destructive canyons. It's a haunting thought, isn't it? His monstrous path was paved, brick by agonizing brick, with rejection and neglect. Each brick laid by a society that preferred to dismiss what it couldn't understand. If even one of those bricks had been replaced with a moment of true connection, a simple acknowledgement of his humanity, might the spark of obsession have never ignited into an inferno? Could the yearning for innocence have been nurtured rather than perverted? This isn't about redemption, not for him, not now. It's about the poignant poetic injustice of a life unlived, a potential squandered by a world too busy, too fearful to truly see. It's the quiet contemplation of how small acts of compassion, utterly absent in his formative years, might have prevented a monumental, generational horror. The silence of what could have been is deafening. The air in this hypothetical past would smell of possibility, of a gentle rain just beginning to fall, washing away the grime of loneliness. The light would be softer, a hopeful dawn rather than an oppressive twilight, hinting at pathways untraveled, futures unwritten. He, the boy, might have learned to dream of something other than escape. Perhaps the rage that simmered within him, the slow burn of resentment, could have been cooled by the simple bomb of acceptance. The thirst for control, born from a lifetime of powerlessness, might have been quenched by a sense of belonging, a feeling of agency gained through genuine human interaction. These are the spectral what-ifs that haunt the periphery of his cursed existence. He, the dream demon, likely doesn't dwell on these alternate realities, for to do so would be to acknowledge the deepest, most painful truth of his own making, that he was created, in part, by the very neglect he now mirrors back to the world. It's a bitter pill to swallow, even for an immortal. And so, the question hangs in the air, unanswered, a haunting whisper across the decades. If someone had simply noticed the boy, truly seen him, would there ever have been a Freddy Krueger to haunt their dreams? The quiet contemplation fades, leaving only the profound melancholy of what might have been. And so, after centuries of torment, after countless screams had faded into echoes and his name had become a whisper of nostalgia, Freddy Krueger finds himself facing the ultimate, most exquisite torture. His final nightmare is his own. The terror he so skillfully wielded against others has recoiled upon him, not in a burst of fire, but in a slow, suffocating embrace of utter solitude. There are no victims here, no innocent minds to invade, no fear to feed upon, just himself and an infinite, echoing silence. He is trapped within his own diminishing dream realm, a boundless prison built from the fragments of his fading power. The elaborate traps, the grotesque illusions, the carefully constructed horrors, they still exist. Perhaps, but they are empty, lifeless stage props in a play with no audience. He paces through forgotten corridors, his bladed hand scraping against spectral walls that offer no resistance, yet provide no escape. The atmosphere in this ultimate confinement is one of profound, crushing despair, a stillness so absolute it feels like the universe itself has held its breath forever. There is no scent here, no hint of human presence or remembered terror, just the sterile, cold void of non-existence. The light, if one can even call it that, is a perpetual, dull grey, like the inside of a coffin, casting no shadows. For there is no source of light, only absence. His only companions are the ghosts of his own actions, the silent echoes of screams he once delighted in, now turned to a flat, meaningless static. He tries to conjure new horrors, to ignite the old spark of malice, but the fuel is gone. The vivid fears of humanity, once so potent, are now diluted, distant, providing no energy. leaving him adrift in a sea of impotence. This is the ultimate cosmic justice, a perverse and fitting end for a creature who thrived on the deprivation of peace. He, who denied sleep and comfort to so many, is now denied the very means of his own escape, trapped in an eternal, horrifying wakefulness within his own mind. He is the last dreamer, the final victim, consumed by the very emptiness he created. He can no longer command the dreamland, not truly. His powers, once so fluid and limitless, are now fragmented, weak, barely enough to sustain his own fading form. He is a king dethroned, his kingdom collapsed in upon itself, leaving him alone in the ruins of his own making, unable to even conjure a proper nightmare for himself, let alone for anyone else. His body, once a symbol of terror, now feels like a heavy burden, a decaying shell he cannot shed. The familiar, burning pain of his past torments might even return, duller, perhaps, but persistent, a constant reminder of the physical agony that forged him, now echoing in a realm where sensation is a dying art. He longs for oblivion, for the true death he once defied. He is trapped in a loop, not of terror, but of profound, aching nothingness. No one remembers, no one dreams of him. He is simply there, an eternal echo in a universe that has moved on, leaving him behind, utterly alone with the silence. It is a nightmare with no victims, no fear, no escape. And so, the master of nightmares finds himself irrevocably lost within his own final and most profound nightmare, condemned to an eternity of silent, desolate company, just himself, and the chilling absence of all things. And so, the tale of Freddy Krueger, not as the icon of terror, but as a figure of profound, cosmic sadness, gently comes to its quiet close. We have peered into the lonely corners of his monstrous existence, glimpsed the origins of his pain, and witnessed the slow, agonizing decline of a power built on the fragile foundation of human fear. There is no redemption offered here, no dramatic arc towards salvation, only a quiet understanding, a melancholic sigh for a soul irrevocably lost, defined by what it could not have. He is not vanquished by a hero's might, nor redeemed by a moment of clarity. His ultimate fate is woven from the very fabric of his being, a slow, agonizing slide into obsolescence, a descent into a self-made purgatory of irrelevance. The once mighty orchestrator of dreams finds himself adrift, a forgotten melody in a world that has simply changed its tune, leaving him behind in the silent, echoing archives of memory. The air around this final contemplation feels still, heavy with the weight of unseen histories, the countless stories that begin in shadows and end in whispers. It carries the faint, almost imperceptible scent of old books and fading photographs, a melancholic perfume of things past and irrevocably gone. The light, as this story concludes, softens to a deep, reflective twilight, the kind that settles just before true night, when the world seems to pause and hold its breath. This understanding of his peculiar torment, this quiet observation of a monster's sorrow, is not meant to elicit sympathy for the heinous acts he committed. Rather, it serves as a chilling mirror, reflecting the profound poetic injustice woven into the fabric of existence itself, that even the most terrifying forces can be shaped by neglect, and even the most potent powers can be rendered null by the relentless march of time and indifference. He exists now, perhaps, as a cautionary tale whispered to the wind, a phantom limb ache in the collective consciousness of a few who still remember the potency of his name. But the fear is gone, replaced by a kind of weary resignation, a quiet acknowledgement of a terror that, like all things, eventually grows old and loses its edge. His legend fades, not with a bang, but with the gentle, inevitable sigh of a world that simply moves on. His eternal torment is not the constant infliction of pain by others, but the chilling realization of his own self-imposed, perpetual isolation. He is alone with himself, and in that boundless silence, the very absence of victims becomes the ultimate punishment. The once vibrant nightmares he wove now unravel, thread by agonizing thread, leaving him suspended in a void of his own making. There is no triumphant end, no final confrontation with a hero. There is only the quiet fading, the gradual erosion of his power as the world shifts, and the kind of dreams he once haunted become rarer, replaced by new anxieties, new distractions. He is not defeated, he is simply outgrown, a monster rendered benign by the very passage of time. And as the last echoes of his story dissipate into the quiet stillness, we are left not with a scream, but with a profound, almost peaceful reflection. The terrifying spectre has revealed his deepest vulnerability, the agonizing loneliness of a legend whose time has passed, whose purpose has diminished, whose very essence is now a mere echo. And maybe, just maybe, tonight, as the quiet settles around you and your eyelids grow heavy, you'll dream of something else entirely. Something soft, something calm, something ... kind. His story settles now, like dust motes in a beam of fading light. The chilling presence, once so potent, softens, becoming merely an echo in the vast, quiet chambers of memory. We leave him there, in his self-made silence, a testament to the profound and often sorrowful truths that lie hidden beneath even the most terrifying of legends. So, as the world outside dims and the night deepens, perhaps you'll consider the quiet desperation that can fuel a monster, or the subtle ways in which time can erode even the most formidable terrors. And as you drift towards your own slumber, remember that not all nightmares are meant to haunt you. Some are simply stories waiting to be understood before they, too, fade away.